as we are getting started, I just want to walk us through a couple of things to keep in mind today. The first one is participation. So of course, I just want to say thank you to everyone who is joining us live today and watching afterwards. We really want to encourage you to turn on your camera. And just to note that when you do turn on your camera, you'll show up in the live recording. This is being recorded afterwards. We will be sending out an email with the link for all of you and write in the chat. So feel free to ask any questions that you might have for Abby. You can either turn your microphone on and share, or if you'd like to remain anonymous, feel free to write in the chat. And last but not least, keeping up with us on social. So as we are getting started and we're seeing a couple more faces come in, welcome Maria, welcome Danny, welcome Donna. I would love to take some time to introduce our amazing speaker today, Abby Epstein. So Abby Epstein is an award-winning filmmaker and the director of the newly released documentary, The Business of Birth Control. In collaboration with producing partner Rick Lake, previous films including Weed the People and Netflix and The Business of Being Born. And prior to working in documentary film, Abby directed Broadway theater, including The Vagina Monologues and Rent. So we're going to be diving in today, and a couple of things that you can expect is talking a little bit about the role that the pill took in women's liberation, the side effects of hormonal contraceptives, which we rarely hear people talk about, and then also a little bit about what reproductive justice looks like. So as we get started, I want to just take a moment to say thank you again, Abby, for joining us, and to have you give a moment to introduce yourself to the group.
Thank you so much, Sienna. I'm so happy to be here. And I loved talking about, my work and just especially as it pertains to women's empowerment. And, and I'm really excited about this new film. We just released it a couple weeks ago, The Business of Birth Control. And it's really, our first film that Ricky and I made came out in 2008, and it was called The Business of Being Born. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it really took on the maternity care system in the United States and looked at not only all the sort of health disparities and iniquities, but it really looked at the experience for mothers in the United States and how the birth model became, I guess, very medicalized over time, and this whole role of midwifery and the sort of spirituality and sacredness of childbirth got lost to a certain extent. And there's been a big movement to try to reclaim autonomy and empowerment and choice in childbirth. And that movie actually has had tremendous impact over the last 14 years. We've just seen a huge doula movement explode in this country, a lot of education. So it was really heartening, I think, for me and Ricky to see that, our little low budget documentary could have like this actual impact. And I think with the new film, with The Business of Birth Control, similar, I should say that The Business of Being Born, when we released it, was not like widely loved and accepted by the medical community. Definitely was controversial, and we definitely got a lot of pushback on the movie in different ways. And I think, we're experiencing some of that as well with The Business of Birth Control. We sort of knew this wouldn't be like a welcome message universally, and it can be controversial, but we very much feel that in the same way that I think The Business of Being Born proved itself over time, we sort of feel like we are on the front end of a conversation that's needed to happen. And we hope we'll have the same kind of impact.
Absolutely. And I mean, Abby, you just spoke on so many different things that I think the folks who are currently watching really want to dive into. And I would love to just dive in specifically on the business of birth control and talking. If you could share with us a little bit about the impact that you've really seen the birth control pill have on women's rights, and then also how might that also have expanded opportunities for certain folks as well?
Sure. I mean, I think that when you look at hormonal contraception, you look at the history of it, right? We have these very, a very dual sort of, I guess, histories, right? So the one thing is there's this really positive history, right? That for the first time, you know, women, and by the way, just for simplification of language, when I say women, I do mean people with uteruses. I mean people who identify as women. I'm including trans community. So I just want to be respectful and just for the purpose of the conversation, when I say women, I'm being inclusive. But I do think that women could control their fertility. So in the 60s and the 70s, I mean, this was incredibly, incredibly revolutionary and, had a great, I think in a huge way, contributed to equality in the workplace, to women being able to have careers, to go on and pursue things. And so there's this, real sense of like women's liberation and empowerment that's connected to the introduction of the pill on the market. At the same time, right, there's this dark history that nobody wants to look at so much, which is how the pill came onto the market. Okay, so the pill was tested on women of color. It was not tested in the United States. It was tested in Puerto Rico. And it was tested on poor women of color who were not informed about the risks. There were many women who died on the original trials of the pill. There were, outcomes of that trial that were definitely hidden. There was, a real push to get this pill developed from Margaret Sanger, who, again, more duality, right? Somebody who really sort of fought in some ways for women to have autonomy and escape poverty, but in other ways, has been connected to the eugenics movement. And that's another piece of dark history that, we have, I think, more recently been willing to look at, and certainly Planned Parenthood has now been, willing to acknowledge and reconcile their founders' connection to eugenics as part of their history. So there's always been, I think, this kind of very positive side in terms of women's advancement through society, and then sort of a shadow side of what the pharmaceutical industry did, which we cover in the movie, in terms of their labeling, in terms of not being forthcoming about certain side effects before putting the pill on the market. So, overall, I think it's just one of those conversations where it's extremely nuanced. It's, it's not a binary conversation about good or bad. And I think that, hormonal contraception overall is an incredibly important option to have access to. And there are a lot of women who rely on it, as we know, as medicine, right? Because there are certain conditions such as endometriosis or fibroids or PCOS that just haven't had any research done. And, birth control is right now like the only treatment for a lot of reproductive health issues. So it's, more than contraception. It is much more than contraception. At least a third of the women who take birth control are taking it to help with, cycle issues and other reproductive health issues. So we can't look at it as, just a contraceptive. But, it's a really interesting history. And I think, overall, the pill's been extremely liberating. But I also think it's been on the market for 60 years. And it's about time that we really talk about the side effects and, get real about this information.
No, absolutely. And Abby, I just really want to acknowledge you for being so intentional, number one, about language, but then also in telling a little bit about the story and the history behind it, right? Because again, I think oftentimes when we're talking about these topics, it's very generalized as putting things into a lot of different into the same bucket without actually realizing all the different nuances and the importance of the intersectionality in the work that y'all are doing as well. So before we move forward, I just want to again remind all of us who have joined, welcome. I see some of you turning your videos on, that this is also an open space for you all to ask questions for Abby as well. So the questions that I'm going to be asking were pre-submitted by folks who were joining. If y'all have anything else, or if Abby says something that really resonates, or you want to lean in with a different question, I definitely want to encourage all of you to be able to do so. So I'll give a little bit of space in case someone does have a question for Abby, and then if not, I'll move on. Okay, so at Power to Fly, we talk about silence not being the enemy. I'll always give space in case folks want to take some time, but feel free to ask questions in the chat as well. Okay, so Abby, I would love to dive in and just hear a little bit more about, for you, what does reproductive justice look like, right? And what are some of those principles around reproductive justice?
Well, if you'd asked me like what I thought reproductive justice was, let's say before I started making the film, I'd probably go straight to like Loretta Ross. I would go to the reproductive justice movement that was really started by Black women and women of color in the 90s. And I think those are the women who should get credit for starting, what we call the reproductive justice movement. But I also think now, and what we talk about in the film, is I feel like we almost expanded, right, that definition. I think in the 90s, it was really a movement to hold doctors accountable, to hold the medical community accountable for what was happening to women of color. And we talk about that in the movie. We trace the history of what happened to women of color, specifically within reproductive health. And we talk about, starting going back from slavery to slaves being used to experiment on, to create modern gynecology, through, as I mentioned, the pill trials in Puerto Rico, through more of like coerced contraception and sterilization of women of color and Indigenous women, going all the way up through, essentially women of color being used as guinea pigs, for products like the Norplant, or, long-acting contraceptives, which again sort of have that shadow of eugenics in terms of trying to control which communities are able to reproduce and which communities are not. So I think that that's very much like that, that reproductive justice movement was really started, I think, in the spirit of that experience. And then what we talk about in the film is somehow, now I think, and what I feel about reproductive justice is I feel we need to look at the entire continuum. So I think from menstruation, menstrual equity, through childbirth, through breastfeeding, through fertility and menopause. There's a whole, continuum of reproductive health, and all along that continuum, I think what you see is inequity, you see misogyny and patriarchy from the healthcare community. You see racism in the way that people of color are, the disparities that they face within, particularly maternity care system for one. And then like something like menopause, just looking at complete lack of research and lack of, any kind of cohesive treatments or plans or information. So I think that it's really like about, for me, the reproductive justice is it's like for everyone to have a right to live a healthy life, right? To have access to information, to have true informed consent, to have options, and to, not be, in a sense, not be, I would say, like what's the word? I lost the word that I'm thinking of. Not persecuted, but to in a sense to be able to experience the entire reproductive continuum with full human rights,
Yeah.
as a full human being, and to also experience joy and pleasure and health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Abby, again, thank you so much for all that you've shared. We have a couple of questions that are coming up, but before we do, I'd love to dive in a little bit more about what you were sharing of how can we make that change and how can we essentially work against what the business of birth control is and being able to have equitable rights for folks across the board. And so could you share a little bit with the group of what are some of the ideas or things that you've seen and be able to say, how do we get there, right? If we think about who's running the business of birth control and the interests that they have in mind, what do you kind of see towards the path? What do you see as the path towards change? Go ahead.
My feelings about the path toward change, again, I'll go back to the business of being born, right? Because here we made this movie about the way hospitals manage childbirth, right? And the hospitals and the doctors are extremely defensive about the things we said in the movie, and they don't really want to change. And, they're not really going to change, right? Because their bottom line here in the United States, where we mostly film these movies, healthcare is profit driven, and hospitals are profit driven, and pharmaceutical companies are profit driven. So, that's why you see, like where I live in New York, every birth center has pretty much closed in the last 14 years since we made the movie. Why? Because they figured out that if they flip those birthing rooms into a fancy hospital room, they can charge double. So they are never, the change is never going to come from the infrastructure unless they see that people are demanding the change, right? So what you saw happen, let's say with childbirth over the last 14 years, is people started asking for midwives, asking for doulas, right? And then suddenly the system was like, oh, wait, we got to cater to these people. Oh, they want midwives. Okay, well, we got to hire some midwives. We got to open the laws. And they did, and many states changed their laws to make midwifery more accessible. I'd like to say they were driven by better outcomes for mothers and babies. I don't know if they were, but I truly believe that change starts with people waking up to their rights. People first waking up and sort of realizing, oh, I thought this was the status quo. I thought this was the way it had to be. Like, I thought everybody just went on the pill at 16 and stayed on the pill until they wanted to get pregnant. Oh, what do you mean? So I feel like, it's that first step, right? And then it's kind of figuring that. Now, what I've seen making this movie, and not to be ageist, but I've definitely seen that if you look at millennials and Gen Z, if you look, from that generation down, it's almost like talking to a different subset of human beings than when you talk to, previous generations. I think that their eyes are much more open. They sort of understand how to peel back the onions of corporations. They've been grown up in the internet age. They understand what's being shared on social media. There can be good and bad, but for the most part, it's like they've been able to access information on their own from a very young age. So I think that those generations are definitely going to lead the path to change, because they're not caught up in the same binds, the same, I think, sort of even the mental construct, even making this movie, right? And, Ricky and I both being Gen X babies, and a lot of women in our age bracket or in our demographic saying, how can you make this movie? oh my God, do you even understand what it would be like if, when women couldn't access contraception back in the 60s, or, how could you, how could you question this holy grail? And you're going to sort of feed into this narrative of the conservatives and the right wing, and they want to take birth control away. And then you would talk to your whatever average, like 23-year-old, and they're like, what are you talking about? I mean, they're like, why couldn't you talk about this? They're like, I don't want to take this pill. Like, I don't want to be on synthetic hormones. I feel terrible on this medication. Why aren't there other options? So it's like, I think when you shut down any kind of conversation, you just like erode trust, in authorities. And I think what I see is younger and younger people having this conversation, that they want to live in a more ecological way and healthier way. They're conscious of chemicals and things they put in their body. So how else could we approach contraception? What else is out there? Can I use this app? Can we try to shift more responsibility on men? And that's, I think with change, like we're working right now with a company that's coming out with a male birth control procedure, which is super exciting. But one of the things that this company has had to face is that people don't think there's a market for it. And they've got a waiting list of like 50,000 men who want this procedure, right? And so it's like showing that, yes, like men would do something. They would step up if there was anything else except a condom, right, for them. So I think it's like, I think the change has to come, really from here. It's not going to come from like a pharmaceutical company or the way doctors practice or the way studies get done around these products, right? It's going to come from people waking up and figuring out, what's the new path and talking to each other. And then, maybe because, well, when capitalism starts to smell, oh, there's a market for maybe a non-hormonal, solution, then they'll start to put that in the pipeline.
Absolutely. And Abby, I mean, you actually touched on one of the questions that the audience had, talking about with the level of advanced technology that we have. And for the folks who are trying to make better choices, someone would be working on making safer birth controls. And I heard you talk about a male contraceptive. I also heard you talk about, well, you didn't say your basal temperature, but being able to take your temperature as well. What are some other things that folks might be able to tap into or that they might not necessarily be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now, for the hormonal options, they sort of make it seem like there's this menu of options, right? Because you can have a ring and a patch and a pill and a shot. It's all the same thing. It's just a different delivery method and a different combination of synthetic hormones, but it's exactly the same choice. It's the same thing. On the non-hormonal side, there is an IUD that is copper, called the Paragard. So some people, I think, if they're interested in pursuing an IUD, unless you kind of go into the doctor's office and advocate and say, hey, I know there's a hormonal one and a non-hormonal one, unless you push for the non-hormonal one, you will probably end up with the hormonal one. So, that is one option. Again, it's an IUD, it has to be inserted. Not everybody handles it well. Not everybody reacts to it well. It's usually more prescribed for women who are like post childbirth, but younger women are starting to use it. And I know some women are very, very, very happy with that copper IUD. And then, the barrier methods, I think everyone kind of knows. There's like, the cap, the sponge, the diaphragm, the condom, the female condom. And then I think there are some newer things that have come out. There's a product called Phexxi, which is a single use gel that's inserted into the vagina before sex. That's kind of a newer product that's come on the market as a non-hormonal. And then we get into the femtech. So we have the apps where, as you were saying, Sienna, you would take your temperature every morning. And whether you sync that to an app or you chart it yourself, you basically track your own fertility. It's called the fertility awareness based methods. Some people call it FAM, F-A-M, fertility awareness methods. And those are not to be confused with the rhythm method. A lot of people kind of get mad when you talk about this and says, oh, the Catholic Church has pushed that for years and it doesn't work. And this is not the rhythm method. It's an actual scientific method. It's observational. It takes into account that, you're going to be fertile about 6 days of each month. They're not going to be the same 6 days. You're going to have to figure out what those 6 days are. And then you're going to have to figure out what to do on those 6 days, right? So you're going to have to figure out, are you going to, abstain from intercourse if you don't want to get pregnant, or are you going to use a condom or a barrier method on those days? It takes, some thoughtfulness. But I think, I think the flip side, the other positive side to it is that tracking your cycle in that way and understanding your own fertility gives you an incredible amount of self-knowledge, both emotionally and physically. And, so I really do like that a lot of teenagers now are tracking their cycle, just to track it on apps, even if it's not about avoiding pregnancy, because there's so much to really, I think, be gained by, first of all, understanding where you are in your cycle. So, right, if you're in your ovulatory phase, you're going to have a lot more energy. You're going to feel smart. You're going to that's when you want to do your presentations at work. Like, that's when you're going to want to feel like going out and meeting people and being social, right? And then when you're in your luteal phase, not so much. Like, you're not going to feel like going to take a HIIT class. Like, and you can schedule your life around your cycle. Like, I think a lot of us forget that the world is designed for men. Okay. Everything is designed for men, from the seatbelts in your car to the chairs. The whole world is designed for men. Medicine was only tested on men. And the pace, the rhythm of our life, the day-to-day, 9 to 5, grind, that is how a male body exists, right? Because their hormonal state is like they do have some ups and downs in testosterone, but generally, they're the same. And for a female body or a menstruating body or someone who has a uterus and has a cycle, their life flow is like this. It's just completely different flow. And I think that a lot of women are finding like some real benefits, to honoring that. And even on a corporate level, some companies now are giving menstrual days off, and are honoring, the rhythm and the cycle of women. So that's another thing that I really think is so beneficial. Even if you're not going to use fertility awareness for contraception, I think just, giving yourself those insights is invaluable.
100%. And I mean, Abby, you're speaking my language when you think about cycle syncing and just the impact that it has. And it goes back to what you were sharing about before in regards to just having that knowledge and also tying that to also liberation in a way as well, right? So being able to control what we can control and having that understanding. And then from there, being able to say, okay, now how can we make change? So I want to pause again, and I want to give space for anyone else. If y'all have any questions for Abby based on a topic that we've spoken about so far, or something that might just be coming up for y'all, I want to give you some space to turn your microphone on if you would like to and ask directly, or you can share it in the chat. And as folks are waiting to do that, I'll just give a quick shout out from Adriana. She said she loves this. The business of being born and why not home helped them make their decisions for at-home births. So thank you, Abby, for all that you do.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Okay, we're going to keep it going. Abby, I want to say thank you again just for all of the knowledge that you're sharing with this group, all of the different resources, and then again, just historical context where I feel like a lot of the times when we talk about these nuanced concepts, it's very rare that we talk about where it actually came from, right? So I want to dive in. We got a pre-submitted question, and someone had said, earlier in my teenage years, I got on the pill. Little did I know that as a person with regular migraines, it wasn't a good contraceptive choice for me. What are some of the side effects that hormonal contraceptions have and that we rarely talk about? If you could give us a little bit more insight on that, I would love for you to share more.
Such a good question. And, the migraine issue is extremely serious. And, anybody who experiences migraines with aura or just migraines in general, or anybody who starts a birth control and gets migraines, that it is a very bad sign. It is a sign that, you need to be trying something else. And it drastically increases your risk of having a serious event like a stroke or a blood clot. And that happened to one of the girls in my documentary. And when her parents are talking about it after she's passed away, they say that they didn't think she had any warning signs, but then they look back and she had been complaining of migraine headaches. And they took her to the doctor, and the doctor never connected the migraines with the NuvaRing, which is the birth control that she was using. And I think, there's a model named Haley Bieber who came out a couple weeks ago saying that she had a mini stroke and that she also connected it, that she has migraines, and she had started a new pill, and those were definitely factors that contributed to her mini stroke. And she, I thought it was really great that she gave a whole public warning and made a YouTube video, trying to tell other people, look, if you have migraines and if you're, taking a new pill and it's that's not for you, oral contraceptive is not for you. So that's really not discussed, which is criminal, I think. I think the other side effects that are not talked about, I think the mental health side effects, I feel like they're talked about a lot. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I do feel that people have connected to some extent depression and anxiety, or just feeling crazy, or, feeling low, or having no sex drive. I do think that people have connected that to oral contraceptives and birth control. I think part of the problem is that when they try to bring those complaints to their provider, they are often gaslit, right? And so they're often told, I think it might just be you, or why don't we try a different brand? But there is now so much evidence, you guys. There's so much research. There's a major study that we talk about in the documentary that connects depression with the use of hormonal contraception, but there are many studies now. There are many studies, and I think that it's terrible, absolutely terrible, that women are not literally being warned when they get any prescription. I don't care if it's a patch or a NuvaRing or a pill. I truly, truly believe that everybody, I don't care if you've had a history of depression and anxiety or you've never been, you should be warned. Track your mood. Do you have a little journal? Track your mood over the next couple months. Just see, because this can cause mood changes. And I think, to me, even saying that a side effect is mood changes, how can that be a side effect? That's trivializing, mental health completely. It's just, it's to me, it's, the people, and some of them are covered in the movie. Some of the stories are covered in the movie, but the people who, these people became suicidal. These women were on medications for anxiety and depression, were close to taking their own lives, and they don't talk about that. They don't talk about the elevated risk of suicide. This is a serious side effect, if you want to call it a side effect. And I really wish that some of the medical community is coming to the table and being more forthright about this and admitting that, the research is there. But I think there's such a pushback from the pharmaceuticals that I'm shocked still. I'm shocked even that people still try to shut that conversation down or say, oh, the data isn't there. So for me, that's really a big one. And then I think other side effects that are sort of lesser known that I've heard about a lot. One of them is, because the pill causes sort of widespread inflammation. There's a connection with autoimmune disease. So there's a much higher risk for developing like Crohn's or IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. There's also essentially what, the oral contraceptive, the pill especially, it really destroys your gut, completely messes your microbiome, completely. And that's connected to the depression, but also that kind of nutrient and vitamin deficiency is a real side effect that can show up in other ways. So it could show up with mood, but it can also increase, risks of cervical cancer because it decreases your folate. It can also, I think, bring on, when we're talking about inflammation, there's a connection with UTIs. There's connection with insomnia, with weight gain, which again, even something simple like weight gain, I've brought that up when I was researching the film with doctors, and they will fight me on that. They will fight me on that. They will say, there's no study.
Yeah. And Abby, again, thank you so much. If y'all are note takers, I hope you're taking some bullet points. You'll also have access to visit this afterwards, but I really appreciate your holistic vision of how all of these different things tie together. When you were talking about inflammation and the autoimmune disease, I smiled because I have an autoimmune disease, and just a lot of doctors don't think about how these different things tie into one another. So I have a couple more questions left. I want to take some time to focus on Danny's in the chat. She shared, moving on or stepping away from hormonal contraceptions is really hard because your body is so used to it. What would you recommend to get away from hormonal contraceptives, to find something safer and better for our bodies and minds?
That is such a good question, Danny. And I think that you are so right. I mean, transitioning off hormonal contraceptives is a process. It's a real journey. You're completely right. And, it's something that needs to be done in a very thoughtful way with support. So there are like so many great resources out there to do this. There's like, I would say almost all the experts in our documentary, like many of them have courses or books or, blogs that they wrote about transitioning off the pill or transitioning off birth control. We're launching a masterclass, a body literacy masterclass in June that covers all of this, that will have a whole episode on, transitioning off hormonal birth control. So one thing you have to understand is that if you went on hormonal birth control for a specific reason, like let's say you went on for acne, okay? When you go off, whatever you were trying to control is going to come back with a vengeance. So it is going to, you're going to have a rebound effect, right? So that's why like a lot of women, their acne or whatever comes back so bad that they can't handle it. They don't know what to do. So they just go right back on, right? So that's why it's really, really important, to do this research. I can give you like so many, resources. I think Elisa Vitti is fantastic. She has a website called Flow Living. She talks about this, and Nicole Jardim talks about this in our movie. There's so many, but one thing that I noticed they all recommend is like starting a supplementation process like 3 months before. So if you know you want to try to get off, you start doing these supplements, try to build back your gut, your microbiome, all of those levels, like 3 months before. And then I've seen all different, techniques about not, maybe if you're on a pill, maybe not quitting cold turkey, sort of more tapering off. So it like leaves your body in a slower way. And I think you just have to be prepared that, your cycle will probably take like 3 months, like it's going to be a little bit of a process. I was just supporting somebody who saw the movie, and she's a friend's daughter, and she decided she wanted to take her implant out. And she lives in Paris, and she was nervous because she has really bad PMDD, which is kind of like a very severe form of PMS. It's a very intense kind of PMS, and it can be very debilitating. PMDD. So she had been on the hormones for that. So it was very scary, for her to come off, because as soon as she came off, she started to experience the PMDD again and the low mood. And, but I think she was patient with herself, and she just followed, lifestyle interventions, food that was suggested, vitamins, supplements, really, really gentle with herself. And I think that's the key, is it's like, you have to kind of figure out how you can sort of be supported. They have classes, even like they have online classes, and they have like Facebook where you can really like support, like, because a lot of people are transitioning off because they want to try to conceive, right? So they have like this double process, because they have to like get off the hormones and then like prepare their body. They have this like window before they want to try to conceive, right? So I think you'll find a lot of resources. Actually, Crystal Curtin, she's in Spain as well, Sienna, but she did a summit with us. She's amazing, Crystal with a K. I can put these in the chat. But she does a specific program like transitioning off birth control and preparing to conceive. So, but I agree with you. I think it is difficult, and I think that it's something that it's frustrating, because even the comedian Sarah Silverman, she did a podcast a couple months ago about coming off the pill after 30 years. And she had a really hard time because she didn't consult a naturopath. Like, she didn't get any help until after. She just kind of did it cold turkey, and she got really depressed. And, it was emotionally very, very hard for her. And she shared that. So I think, the key is like support. And then if you were using it for contraception, right? So then figure out like, then what are you going to do next? If you get your cycle back.
Absolutely, Abby. And I mean, I want to transition. I know that we have about 15 minutes left, but I think it'd be remiss if we didn't talk or speak with you about the Roe v. Wade potential overturn and that implication, right? One of the questions that we got from folks that they had pre-submitted is, okay, well, if we do move away from hormonal contraceptives, we'll lose our freedom of choice, especially in the climate that we're in right now. What are some things that we can be doing, and what are some of the implications that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this idea of, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that then there's this whole kind of house of cards waiting to fall. Like, then they're going to go for birth control, and then they're going to go. I mean, I'm not weighing in either way. I'm just saying, I don't see, I think, as I said in the beginning, birth control, hormonal birth control is used as medication, and like so many people rely on it to treat hormonal conditions. and literally wouldn't be able, especially like endometriosis, I mean, really wouldn't be able to like function without it. So it's hard for me to see it being like taken away. I think access is already an issue in many parts of the country and many communities. So access is a big issue. I think as far as the film goes and what we're saying, I think one thing that is really important to think about, at least in the United States, right? So we know that like 50% of pregnancies are unplanned, okay? At the same time, we know that about 50% of women will stop hormonal birth control, like the pill, within 6 months because of the side effects. So I don't feel like right now the situation is great, right? Like, what does having access to birth control mean if 50% are going off of it because of intolerable side effects, right? And now go back to 60 years when the pill first came out and was tested on men and has been tested on men several times since then. And every single time they found the men won't tolerate the side effects. They won't tolerate them. That's it. The trial's over. You know, that's why a male pill has never come to market. So, you know, women have always had to like bear these side effects. So I think that one thing is, okay, if access to abortion is going to be revoked or threatened, first of all, look at all these states that are looking at a 6-week ban, right? So a 6-week ban on abortion is basically a full ban, okay? This is, again, why I think these fertility awareness methods and cycle tracking is so important, because if you are living somewhere where there's a 6-week ban, you know, you've really got to be tracking, right? You've really got to know your body. You've got to understand your fertility so I think, you know, that the body literacy piece of it, what we talk about the film, I think is like even more important. I do think that there's this idea of like, well, they're going to, you know, overturn access to abortion. So everybody needs to get on birth control, you know, birth control. But again, you're just creating another burden. It's like a second burden for women. So now you're saying to women, okay, well, you either are going to have to be on hormones your whole life, or, you know, accidentally get pregnant and then have forced birth. You know, I mean, that's not a good binary either. So it's like very hard to, I really don't like, you know, this big sort of like, oh, we've got to throw all the women on birth control now, you know, God forbid there's no abortion access. Again, that's not the answer. I mean, the answer, going back to the beginning of the conversation, is reproductive justice, right? But if they're taking reproductive justice away from us, my feeling is like, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't know if you remember this, but at the very beginning of the pandemic, you know, we did a lot of like Zooms and conversations with women's health specialists. And what we saw, right, was that suddenly women couldn't get to the doctor's office anymore, right? So suddenly that was like, they couldn't, you know, they couldn't either get their, you know, IUD taken out or put in, or couldn't get their pill prescription, or if they had a yeast infection, you know, they couldn't treat it. And so sort of became this interesting time, okay, where the home birth rates went up. There was so much interest in home birth because no one wanted to go to a hospital with COVID, right? And it was interesting, right? And then also this kind of like DIY, you know, treatment kind of sprung up, and people were having to figure out like their cycles and how to figure out like how to treat their yeast infections. And you know, I think like we show in the film, you know, in the 70s, I think that was a big part of the women's movement, was this idea of having access to your cervix, looking at your own cervix, understanding your body. And some of that is coming back. And I feel that, you know, if we are living in a place where we can't trust a government to give us basic human rights, basic reproductive rights, you know, then a lot of things are going to fall back again on communities of women, right? Helping each other to access abortion, helping each other. But I still think the answer is not sort of an unquestioned acceptance of birth control. It is not the answer, you know? I mean, the answer is always to have these options available for everyone who wants them, and the true informed consent, you know, that should go with them. But I think that we have to be able to not be binary about it. And I think this conversation is so important because, you know, not connecting like your birth control pill to your mental health is such a blind spot, and it can literally destroy your life if you're not aware. And I don't think that conversation has any place in politics. It's just not about politics. I don't care what the left is saying. I don't care what the right is saying. I care about body sovereignty, and I care about, you know, people understanding what they're choosing to put in their body and what it can do, and being able to make that connection. And I think that conversation still has to keep going, even in the light of, you know, abortion being overturned.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for sharing your point of view on that. And then also just breaking down some of the misconceptions that folks might have been having as well. I want to give a little bit of time and just say a quick thank you to Paloma for sharing more about the business of birth control in the chat. I want to open up space. Last call, y'all. If anyone would like to turn their mic on and ask Abby one of the closing questions. Okie dokes, it's over to me. So Abby, before we dive into where folks can find you and how they can keep in touch, I would really love for you to just round us out with a question that we got from a pre-submitted question saying, how can we, with all the things that we've learned today, from the historical aspects to the importance of the intersectionality around birth control, looking at things from a holistic point of view, what can we do to advocate for that holistic and inclusive contraceptive alternatives? And what does the future of that really look like, in your opinion?
I mean, I think, you know, we started like sort of a grassroots, like a change.org petition that's on our website. I don't know how much effect that will have, but I think the gist of the movement of what we're saying is that, you know, we want more non-hormonal development. And, you know, I really think in a way, it's like the way I think to advocate for it is honestly just to like share this information. I think it really is, like, the film is an amazing tool, and you can share the film. It's available for rent. And then if you get on our mailing list, we do a free like screening series every month. So every month we make the film available at no cost for a couple days. So like, you know, there's no barrier to access to the movie. And I think, you know, sharing the film and, you know, educating each other, I think is a big step, because I think right now that is where a lot of women are going for health resources, to online groups and peers, because they're just not getting the answers and the information they need. So I would say, you know, just to keep sharing the resources, the information, the film, and, you know, to keep the conversation going. And I think ultimately, you know, and I think also, you know, if you do find some of the non-hormonal options that are out there, you know, and they do happen to work for you, or, you know, you feel better, or, you know, you've seen how it's like improved your quality of life, you know, then share. Because a lot of women don't understand. They really think that you'll just be pregnant. And if you don't, you know, if you're not on something every day of the week, that it's just like you can get pregnant every day of the month and you'll just be pregnant. And, you know, and they create this huge like fear around it. And I think, it's like breaking it down, like just sharing this basic body literacy information. That's like, look, if you want to take these contraceptives and it works for you and you feel good on them, great. But if you don't feel good on them, there are other options.
I love that, Abby. And again, just a quick call to action for all of us who are listening in right now, whether you're here live or in the recording. You have access to the link in the chat of the business of birth control. And then also share this conversation with Abby with your communities as well, right? I'm sure we all learned so much today in the different topics that we're talking about. Share the link afterwards, start sharing the work, and then opening up for those conversations. So Abby, I just really want to thank you for joining us and creating the space we were all able to learn, dive in a little bit more. And as we're wrapping up, just any last words for this group, anything you'd like to leave us with one big takeaway that you'd like for us to keep walking into our Tuesday with?
Yeah, I would just say, I would say, like, just trust your own body's intuition and never, ever feel like you need to go against yourself. Never feel like just because somebody has a white coat and a stethoscope around their neck, that they know what's best for you. And I say this as a mother as well. The same thing goes for you or your child. It's like, I always know, I'll listen to the doctor's advice, but ultimately it's like, I know I have a gut instinct as a mother about what I want to do for my child. And, and it's the same for myself. So I feel like, do not be afraid. We've all been conditioned to be obedient and good and, listen to people with big degrees hanging on their wall. But it's honestly, I think, be your own advocate, do your own research.
Thank you so much, Abby. And again, we're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. Folks are saying the session has been really helpful to help them with their journey getting off hormonal birth control. Folks are asking for recordings. So just a reminder, this will be available on powertofly.com. We also want to encourage for all of y'all to go check out the business of birth control. Abby, thank you so much for all that you've shared today. And we're so grateful to have had you here with us.
Thank you, Sienna. My pleasure.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I hope all of you have a great day, and we'll talk to you all soon. See you at the next Chat and Learn.